of back to what we first said is, the real you has to come out at some point. I mean, you can't live a lie all of your life.
Free to Grow in Forestry, a podcast working to move forestry forward. The Canadian Institute of Forestry and the Centre for Social Intelligence proudly present the Free to Grow in Forestry podcast. The Free to Grow in Forestry initiative was launched to create a diverse and inclusive workplace culture where all Canadians feel they belong. We believe strongly that inclusive cultures not only strengthen our Canadian forest sector economy, but also create resilient and healthy communities. This podcast seeks out guests from all aspects of the forest sector, from the C-suite to every part of the underrepresented communities, to open up the dialogue on issues of concern and points of view so that everyone has greater knowledge and understanding of each other. By unearthing these discussions, we hope to stimulate greater empathy and respect for all people, opening up the forest sector to be more welcoming and accepting of everyone. For our second episode, we are pleased to be joined by our host Kelly Cooper, founder and CEO of the Centre for Social Intelligence, and our guest, Richard Dominy, who recently retired from a position with the Government of British Columbia's Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development as the Manager of Business Applications for Timber Sales. Richard is also currently the President of the Canadian Institute of Forestry and President of the Forest History Association of British Columbia. We are eager to hear more from Richard as he shares his experiences as a gay man in the forest sector and how we can all work to be more accepting of the LGBTQS2+ community and underrepresented groups. This session was recorded live on May 25th, 2021.
Welcome, everyone, to the Free to Grow podcast. Today, I am very happy to be joined with Richard Dominy. Richard is a long-standing forest sector employee, I think post now in retirement. However, he will be speaking with us today about his experience as a gay man in the forest sector. So welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you here today and to talk to our listeners because, as you know, the Free to Grow podcast is all about sharing people's stories from underrepresented groups and trying to create a greater understanding so that people will be more accepting and ultimately so that people like yourself can feel they belong in the forest sector. So I wanted to start today just to look at what it was like for you growing up. Can you just give us a little context of what life was like for yourself in those earlier days?
It took probably a long time to really determine that who I really was. So, and I think that happens a lot. I do know that, I always like to hang around the girls at school,
Mm-hmm.
I had male friends too, and so, and some of those friends, the girlfriends, are my friends now. Susan, who's my longest term, we've known each other since we were about 3.5 or 4. And so, it's awesome. So not really an issue. It was Alberta and a small town Alberta. And so, of course, it was probably a lot rednecky kind of
Mm-hmm.
But I really didn't think much about it, and because there wasn't much conversation about that,
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of just charged along, and then, over time, you determined that you had a lot of interest in those guys as they went by, or at the beach or whatever. I was so fortunate. I lived on a creek, and so everybody came down to the creek, every week, weekend or all summer, basically. We were there rafting, building rafts and swimming and doing all those things.
Sounds idyllic.
It was, and my I think I told you, but my world was sort of turned a bit upside down when I was 12. And so my mother committed suicide, and that, things changed drastically at that time.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that's not what this conversation is really about, but it shapes you. Right?
Sure.
teach you about, your life and so on. And so many people were so good to me, in terms of pulling them into their families and doing things with them and so on and so forth. Right. And
did you have siblings? Do you have siblings?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. And, but I was thinking about this the other day and on this sort of subject because, we see lots of things about, youth and parental suicide and so on and so forth. And, I don't know what it is, if it's just internal strength or what it is that just allows you. I mean, it never, I always am very open about that. I always talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But you see lots of people that really, really struggle and, have a horrible life, and they'll always revert back and tell you that story, and how terrible it was. Yes, it was. But you pick up and you get on. That's my mom sort of said, we're in charge of your life, right? So
it's true. And it may be for different age people. When it hits people at different ages, it impacts them differently in that decision making.
And it's like, latter years, and not because I went to a psychologist, but several of them have told me the worst thing that can happen to a boy is to lose his mother when he's in early puberty, and the same girl with her father. And so it's a really
major impact. Yeah.
Major impact, right? So really, I had a grand childhood. I really did. So no regrets there. But I think I told you the last time when we were chatting, from work, we found a video. We were watching lightning and we were recording it and so on and so forth, having a barbecue. And so there, I'm making salad or whatever, and I'm in these short shorts and this tight t-shirt. And and my partner, Greg, was killing himself laughing. He says, "Oh, and you thought you weren't gay?" No. Really,
It was obvious to everybody else.
It was obvious to everybody else. But those times of work, I worked in small places, but they were, you didn't just stick your head up. That you just kind of.
You were there to do a job, and you did the job. Didn't matter about anything else. So, with your mom passing early in your life, did you think that had any impact on your ability to come out from?
I mean, I know that she would have just, like us, we'd be having a discussion and she said, "That's who you are, then that's who you are." And
very accepting then.
I mean, she was so far ahead of her time, things that she discussed and other families would just cringe because, the boys would come and we'd all sit around, like we'd come back in the swimming hole starving and we'd have tea or coffee or chocolate or whatever. And of course, then there's the conversation, and she would always straighten out people with those crazy ideas that your parents are telling you. Right?
Oh, really? So she was a straight shooter?
From like Santa Claus, I came home one day, I said, that is impossible. There's no way that somebody could fly around the entire world in a sleigh with a bunch of reindeer. I mean, I said, that's just not physically possible. And she said, well, yeah, I thought you'd come to that conclusion sooner or later. But she said, it's fun. And she said, don't you go and spoil it for any other little kids, because that's the joy of Christmas. And
and so was your dad a figure there for you that was also supportive in you being a gay man?
I would say not. I mean, no, absolutely not. I mean, I never, ever could discuss that with him because, I mean, he was so homophobic that, oh my goodness, right? And I know I never ever broached that subject with him. So.
And he's no longer around, I'm assuming?
He passed away at 93. And, I guess in some ways that was probably a good thing. We never had to.
That discussion.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you entered the workforce. You're in the forest sector, and you were working for the corporate side, like the out in the bush, or were you?
No, I started
in the government. Give us a little picture of your work experience.
Once I graduated, 1981, and I was so fortunate. That was a good year because, of course, some years it's good for hiring and others not. And so within weeks, I got a call from the Forest Service in Cranbrook and said, will you please come down for an interview? And by the time the interview was over, well, thank you, you're hired. You should go look for an apartment.
Perfect.
Yes, yeah. It was and Cranbrook, if you have been there, I mean, it's just a beautiful, spectacular place.
I haven't been there.
So you need to take a trip someday. You know. So beautiful place, about 20,000 people, and in the Kootenays, so the East Kootenays. So
at this point, you're like 21 years old or so, and have you just what age are you then?
I'm just trying to think. 1981, 55, 65, 75. Yeah. Just under 20, actually.
Okay. And at this point, you're fully aware of who you are as a gay man, or no? No? Okay.
I think that predominantly I still knew how sort of cautious that you had to be. And in this sector, I mean, the guys that I worked with, you know, I mean, you know, you can imagine there, you know, this one guy, Mark, I mean, he's bushy bearded, he's a mining guy, and, you know, and Craig, they all were bearded guys and big, strong, muscular, bearish type guys, right? And it never came up, like, as it doesn't need to, like, I don't, when I meet people, I don't ask what they do in the bedroom, you know?
Well, I agree. And I think that's one of the important messages of explaining these stories is that we're here to work. We're not here to discuss what we do in the bedroom. And frankly, it's completely irrelevant.
It is irrelevant, right? And you know, when you have a friend, they're a friend, it doesn't matter what they are, where they come from. And that's why probably I have such a hard time about, well, I can't even figure out all of the pronouns, to be perfectly honest. And I just can't understand, you know, why it has to be so front and center, because, you know, it's sort of like, it's pushing it into somebody else's face. And so, you know, anyway, that's just, you know, something.
Yes, I can understand that. And I think the point we're just underlining is we're here to work. You know, I guess for some people who don't want to be stereotyped into the he or she categories, they're the ones who want to be seen as they, because they feel that they can, as a woman, perform like a man's job, and they don't want to be judged to not be capable. And so if they present as a they, perhaps they feel there's a greater opportunity for acceptance to do both roles that we normally have so stereotyped.
You know, if one of my friends said that's, you know, what they chose to be, and so we'd have a short conversation and say, so what am I calling you? Okay, that's fine. Okay, move on. You know, you know, so you'd accept them for who they are. But like I said, those are still early days. And so that really never really came up in conversation. And, you know, they were all great people to work with. And I don't ever recall it really ever being an issue in the early years. And then the later years, I mean, basically, you know, I started to know who I was, and when the closest friends knew who I was, and then we just sort of carried on. And the other day I was talking to, I'm also a member of an organization, kind of a worldwide organization called Prime Timers, which is a sort of mid-age to older age gay men's organization all over the world. And I said to one of Greg's friends, Bruce, who's part of that, the director, and I said, oh, I'm doing this podcast, you know, and he just lit up. He said, oh, that is just the best thing. That is so wonderful. Right?
That's excellent. That's a great reaction. So what was his motivation behind that? What's he getting at?
And I said that I thought that it was going to be released during Pride Week or somewhere in there. And he said, oh, that's the best. He said, you know, we have to get out and just talk to people and just be ourselves. And he said, good for you. And he said, but so many people, he said, you know, he says, I know it's not you that wouldn't talk to somebody about it. But he says, so many people, they're not going to say anything to anybody, right?
So let's explore that just a little bit. So you're obviously, go ahead.
I just wanted to make one comment, because the struggle isn't over, because I have friends in Brazil, and I was watching the news the other day. A teacher was murdered in Brazil because of his sexuality. And I just go, it's not over.
Mm-hmm.
That's not
That's
over.
horrible.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's other countries that are way worse than that too. I chat with guys that you wouldn't, like they tell me, you wouldn't dare even infer, right? You wouldn't even look sideways at another guy. You just wouldn't do that in their country.
So what is the fear that you think most people are feeling, or what do you think causes people to react that way?
That's an awfully good question. I think there's sort of the part of being different, like those people are different and I don't understand it. And so sometimes you react in a very negative way because of that. We see that, not to do with sexuality, but I mean, just redneck places, whether it be in the United States or even in some of our provinces, there's some pretty strong attitude about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And I just shake my head and I go, where does that come from? Like, why would you pick on somebody just to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have a different belief than you do. And that religious. I mean, it's got nothing to do with sexual. It could be religious, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a crazy, crazy kind of thing. And you sort of think, sort of the Harvey Milk story and all the good things that he did and so on. But then we have, our man that basically saved us during World War II. And what did they do? They chemically castrated him. And he's now been honored, and a wonderful movie made about him. It kind of tears me up. I mean, it's like...
Sure, it's tragic.
He was so smart, and he basically pulled you through World War II, and you just tortured him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to some degree, this still goes on. So you sort of ask, what was my biggest sort of, fear and whatever is, you hear the stories where people are taken out and that young man, he was, tied up in barbed wire fence and murdered, right? And so that's the biggest fear, I think, that any gay young man has.
So for you to feel confident then, given that context, to come out and declare yourself a gay man, you obviously had certain conditions surrounding you to give you that comfort. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that, because essentially that's what we're trying to create here in the forest sector, is an environment or a workplace where people feel that they can be their true selves, right? And feel that they are safe, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, to be themselves, and that they will be supported and ultimately feel like they belong. So maybe you could share a little bit about your experience of how you came out as a gay man and what environment you had working for you to create that.
I was just so very, very fortunate. I had a long-term friend who, we sort of just slipped into a 10-year heterosexual relationship with Leslie. And we talked about this all the time. I mean, she recognized, she said, I see how you look at those guys.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And so we talked all the time. We talked about that. And so she encouraged, she said, you just have to, be who you are, And she said, you are so highly thought of by your friends, it will not make any difference.
Right.
And so that would just be my comment to anybody. Hopefully they have friends that are very supportive and are sort of doing exactly the same thing, to say, you really do need to just stand up and say, I'm done. This is how it is. This is who I am. And I know it's not always so easy when you have cultural, like parent, you come from a culture. I know young men who are 40 years old and they don't dare tell their mother. And I go, well, I said, most mothers already know. You have to understand.
Yes, that's true.
Right?
Yep, for sure.
Fathers, not so much, but mother.
I can remember, I'm just thinking of a story. I can remember in university, I was living with 3 other girls and a guy. We engaged this guy because we had an extra room to come and live in and rent out from the same place as us. It was just a year. It was our final year. Later on, he was a British guy, but he was from Zimbabwe. And I ended up traveling to Africa later, a couple of years later. So I went and visited him and his family, and they had a beautiful ranch and so forth. But he was took me for a drive, and he said to me, now, Kelly, I have to tell you something. I am gay. And I just looked at him like he was crazy. I said, I have known that for a long time. Why are you telling me this now? So I think that's true. There's a lot of people can see that in others, that they may not realize they're seen. But in a corporate culture, for example, okay, so we want to create a workplace culture where you have that comfort to talk to someone. I mean, perhaps an executive to ensure, like if this is not a known thing in the organization, for example, there is an acceptance right now, let's say, in an organization that is maybe has a culture of saying inappropriate comments or just not open to that. What would you offer up to those in an executive position that they should do in order to change that workplace culture?
Well, I lead by example in everything you do, right? And
so role modeling.
In that executive position, I mean, in all of your conversations, and it's probably rarely the workplace conversations. It's when you go to an event, you know, you're staying out at a resort for a few days and there's alcohol, and, you know, that's when all those kind of crazy things often come out that should never have come out, you know.
You mean inappropriate comments? Is that what you mean?
That's my experience.
Okay.
Alcohol flows and when things are a lot, right? But within the workplace, I mean, it's, you've got your cubicle from Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, whatever. And the tone, now government is a bit different because the tone is just unacceptable. I mean, you actually sign off a sheet and you talk me. I mean, you sign off that this is the culture of government.
It's the code of conduct here. And this is the way it is. And if there's anything otherwise, there will be repercussions.
Exactly. Absolutely. Right.
Which I think is reasonable. And I think a lot of organizations have that, but they don't necessarily enforce it. So that may be the differential.
I think that's certainly a starting point. But by leading by example, I mean, you know, I think you'd be hard pressed, any executive, that they don't have gay or lesbian friends somewhere in their family or neighbors or whatever, right? Right here, you know, we moved in here and we were all excited because we have two gals that have been living together for 40 years and they are awesome neighbors. They just are awesome. And, but we don't say, are you lesbian? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to assume that you live together, and so we probably are, right? You know, unless somebody opens up to you about their home life or, you know, thinking of leaving their wife and, you know, because they want to take off on a new journey, you know, something like that. I mean, largely, you know, when you're working, that stuff isn't even on you. You know, you just don't talk about that. You know, somebody wants to, they know you're a gay man, they'll go and say, can you go for a walk? And like you said, you know, that they will be expressive and they will ask questions and say, how did this work for you? Or what should I do? Or I'm feeling this way or whatever, right? And there's lots of resources available too. And so that's the other thing probably executives should know is, where are these resources available? You know, you know, if we have to have questions regarding this, where are the best resources? And
those are resources for learning. Is that what you're referring to?
And also, you know, these days, in pretty well every organization, I mean, we know that, I mean, you probably know that there are gay guys in your organization. So if you thought somebody was struggling, I mean, that would be probably a good thing if they were willing to link them up and they can, you know, have a conversation about that kind of thing in the workplace at all. But ultimately, there is no place for any, whether it be religious or cultural or whatever. And lots of us have trouble with that. You know, there's the whole bunch of emotions that come through.
But that gets down to, again, an education piece, I think, because it's a cultural dynamic. It's a cultural difference. And although we may feel it is not serving our needs, we need to be empathetic and think about their ability to be their authentic selves at the workplace and what it means for them if they have a religious overtones that makes them feel comfortable, whatever it may be. It's an awareness, again, about educating ourselves, whether it's with what it is to be a gay man or what it is to be an Indigenous person or what it is to be a new immigrant in Canada. But it's creating that awareness and getting some education about the cultural differences or the gender differences, whatever it is, right? But it's I think, to be remaining curious so that when we do see people who aren't like ourselves, we aren't entering into that conversation with our own agendas or our own fears, perhaps. You know, we need to think maybe about what is going on for them, and how can we learn? So why is it, ask questions, right? What is it like for you to wear a burqa? What is it like for you to be a gay man here? What can we do better? What is hindering you from bringing your true self to work? What can we do to make that happen? It's important that I think we remain open-minded and like I say, curious. I know for the times I've done a lot of travel into India and many places that are foreign land, you could say, than where we are here in Canada. It's done me so much good because I just have different perspectives, right? And I'm now very not only grateful for what we have in Canada, but much more accepting of what other people have endured, frankly, in some other cultures, and what they've had to experience. And then just sort of an appreciation for what they're doing here in Canada, like what it's taken for them to come here. But for those who have just gotten here, it's them. This is them.
It is. And, it's rather interesting too. But I'm just saying that, as we know more, and we had a neighbor in Victoria who was Islamic. And I always thought, being in school and you're the only one that has that, that's tough.
Yeah.
Right? When every other kid's got a baseball cap on or whatever,
Yeah.
It is, because I remember, and this is simple. I mean, coming from the UK and, the things that my mother would want me to wear or certain shoes or whatever. And I said, oh, nobody wears that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't want to look like the oddball.
I don't want those kind of running shoes, right? But, and so we spoke the same language, came from the same culture, everything, but it's still, there's differences when you emigrate, right?
For sure. So it sounds like you've captured so many things here today, Richard. We've delved into all kinds of parts of, I would argue, the underrepresented groups that we are working toward creating greater inclusion in the forest sector right now. So people with mental health, you've touched upon. So that's the unseen persons with disabilities, obviously being a gay man, as well as we've even talked a little bit about new immigrants and how that can play out for people's reactions. But just to get back to your storyline, what is it that you'd like to leave people with? Like, I'm not sure. It sounds like your workplace was pretty safe in the sense that nobody really picked on you for being gay. It sounds like you had a very accepting environment from which you could comfortably be yourself, right? And I'm not sure you had a hard experience that way, but of people who have, as you've shared. But what are the key messages you'd like to leave people with on that note?
Going back to what we first said is, the real you has to come out at some point. You can't live a lie all of your life. You need to have people who you can have confidence in, and you need to tell them, and then it expands, and so that more people know and whatever. That's one thing. I don't think you could, it must be terrible going through your entire life and not being that realistic person to say, I am, a gay man or whatever. I have older friends that, think that Greg and I are just friends and we just are roommates, and that's what they believe. And
that's all they're prepared to accept right now.
I'm not trying to convince them differently. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And they have two friends that are two women that live together, and they definitely are, because I know Barb and Shirley really well, and we talk about this kind of thing. But lots of their friends, they just think they're just friends. They're just friends, right? But that's as much as they can, accept at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So other than that, you need people who you can have like confidants, right? During that period of time, you need to have people that maybe are gay men or women that you could talk to and, freely about anything. And that's super important. And they'll give you the confidence to one day put the flag up and say, well, this is who I am. And as I told you, that my experience, and I have some really redneck friends, and, like RCMP, we're in Bosnia, we're on big missions. Bomb squad, the guys that have seen the blood and the guts of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my good friend Larry, he just said, I don't care who you sleep with. He said, you've been my friend for 30 years. And he says, that's not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other key. And if somebody does have a problem with it, then they truly aren't your friend. So
yeah, well, I think we're blessed in this country to have acceptance for it in the first place. So people who may listen to this podcast could come from other parts of the world. This is going to be accessible to anyone, but we have to recognize that our government, first and foremost, is creating that safe space for that, so that people aren't, like the mention that you had in Brazil, being killed for being gay. So we're lucky in that regard. We are blessed with a government that creates that safe space, you could say. But when it gets to the companies, that's what we were talking about. How can we get organizations to really shift their workplace culture to be more accepting of gays? And you've mentioned the role modeling, the code of conduct. That's important. Providing training and resources to create that acceptance. And maybe what it comes down to is a phrase I'm just making up here, but an acceptance bandwidth. So some people just don't have the same bandwidth for getting their heads around change. Right. And change isn't for everyone. Like you can have change overload. And in a workplace environment, perhaps, there's certain stereotypical personalities, let's just say, who are quite happy with the heterosexual workplace environment, and they do not want to accept one more thing. If you're going to impose training on me now to accept all these underrepresented groups, why do I have to do that? It's got nothing to do with my job. But it's really important, I think, that these guys do that, because it will create that psychological safe space at the workplace where where people haven't felt they can bring their true selves to work. And there's statistics now that show that if you can do that, and you can comfortably do that, the performance of each individual and team accelerates a lot. It's crazy. It's like 50%. So it's really important that we, even if we are people who say, well, it doesn't really matter what it's like in the workplace, they need to signal, I guess, how things that it create that workspace where people can feel they can be themselves, because that will create comfort and belonging.
Well, I think also, we were talking about, code of conduct, and I mean, those are all great. They're written on a piece of paper, and maybe there's a little training, 5-minute kind of thing that you have to go through or whatever. But the biggest thing is when your executive leaders or your supervisors, district manager, CEO, whatever it be, that they, not in a pushy way, but once in a while, they just keep reminding people of those differences, right? Whether they could be cultural, they could be somebody coming from a different country, religion, sexuality. There's all sorts of ways to talk about that. But just to sometimes, sometimes when you're sitting around a fire, sometimes you just need to say, we have to be very understanding and inclusive. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we find it difficult, right? I mean, I think it's easy to, I mean, if you're a good communicator, then it's easy for you to be able to do that. And not just because you get pushed up the ladder as an executive doesn't give you this skill set.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
I've had managers that they really should be fired. I mean, they really should never have ever got there. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, you know people in your past organizations that now that person would have just been the best. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
And I don't know if that answers your questions or not, but it's not an easy topic, and we just have to keep working slowly, moving forward.
Yes, I think the awareness is key, and just having your stories shared here today and talking about what it was like for you. I mean, it sounds in general that you were pretty fortunate with your experience. I don't know that all people have that smooth ride. So it's important that we can signal to those people, of course, that our conversation here in the forest sector is trying to make that difference. It's trying to make that safe space to allow people to feel comfortable. And the more we can educate people from senior executive positions right on through to the middle managers, who are often considered the most resistant to any change, to the frontline workers, we need to be creating that awareness so that this change can happen, and really recognizing everyone is just here to work regardless of their sexual orientation.
Yeah, and all the other issues, different religions and different beliefs, and so that's all part of trying to work together. And it's not always easy, especially if somebody's trying to push their agenda. And you also, as gay individuals, have to be rather cautious about that. Is not everybody's really that interested in listening to you about, what you did with Bob this weekend. Because they have a different kind of set of values, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, or religion or anything, right? It's the workplace is a tough place, But I did want to sort of just throw something out, Kelly, because, we've been working at home and we're away. And the talk around the water cooler, I mean, that's sort of the expression I always use.
Yes.
You find out lots of things about the organization, but that's where you actually get to know some of the people, don't you?
For sure.
What their kids are doing, and then that makes it real. Like, these are people, it doesn't matter if they're from Nigeria or if they're from wherever, because you can ask them questions. What did you make for supper last night? Oh, that sounds interesting, but I've never had that, or whatever. I don't know. All being part of the workforce, and that is sort of blown away. I was reading some stats the other day that there's a majority of employees that actually want to go back to the office.
Oh, for sure there are. That social interaction is critically missing right now.
There's that study where it said we're missing out on promotion because you often hear at the office, you hear about, there's a position opening up in that sector or this sector or the other thing. And that's not happening anymore.
It's true. Very true. It's also the body language, and that's what we're missing. Like, we can get the face on screen here today, but we're not getting the energy from bodies. I think that's a thing. And when you're in the same room, you either you can take the positive energies, or alternatively, you can take the negative energies, right? So we're missing those dimensions to our workplace right now, for sure.
Very odd world we've had for a couple of years, that's for sure.
Yes. Well, thankfully, it looks like we're emerging out from it.
Yes. Yes. Thank goodness for that. Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for your time today. I appreciate all your insights and thoughts and suggestions and sharing your story. You went into a few other things, which I find also very interesting. And we actually have something in common that way. My brother took his life about 16 years ago now. And it's a different experience than most experience. But I completely understand and empathize with what you've been through, because it is, for me, it was life altering.
Well, it marks you. You never will be the same.
Correct. And although I am of the same resilient spirit that you spoke of, in terms of you just choose to go forward, it nevertheless is an indelible imprint in your life and in your heart. And when you can speak openly about that, then I think you create a destigmatization of it, right? And I think that's what we're doing on all kinds of topics we're crossing here today. And it's important to just keep the conversation going. And the more we do that, the more people can take those jittery energy buzzes that go through our bodies with nerves or anxieties about the topic, and it just quiets the body, right? And we can just start to be truly in our skin and creating that, presenting in our true, authentic self.
I think that it's good to have these sort of open conversations and lots more of them. So thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. One day, perhaps we'll meet in person, pick up that positive energy vibe, and all kinds of conversations. Yes. Happy Pride Month.
Yes. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Gender, diversity, and inclusion are crucial to the advancement of a thriving and resilient forest sector. As we continue to grow and change, we all have a role to play in making our sector a place where everyone has the support they need to succeed and thrive. For more information on how you can take action and help make a difference, follow Free to Grow in Forestry on social media or visit us at www.freetogrowinforestry.ca. And if you have a story you think should be heard about an experience you have had or a way you'd like to see happen in the Canadian forest sector workforce, we'd love to hear from you. Please email us at freetogrowinforestry@cif-ifc.org. Together, we can move forestry forward.